Hi everyone. Firstly, a huge thank you to the people who have contributed to my fundraising so far. It really means a lot. A week or so ago, I had a great conversation with our expedition leader and founder and leader of Sea Women Expeditions, Susan Eaton. And one of the things we talked about was putting together a greenhouse gas calculator for the expedition so that we can look into purchasing appropriate offsets. Since I used to work in greenhouse gas accounting, I offered to take this on. And for this week's update, I thought I'd put together a little primer video on how greenhouse gas emissions are typically calculated. A greenhouse gas is a gas that traps heat in the Earth's atmosphere and contributes to the greenhouse effect. Earth gets essentially all of its energy from the sun. The sun's energy that reaches Earth covers the whole spectrum, from the visible light we can see to the very short and long wavelengths that we can't. The Earth absorbs this energy and radiates it back out again. However, unlike the broad spectrum energy that comes here from the sun, the Earth mainly emits energy in the infrared portion of the spectrum. Greenhouse gases are very good at absorbing infrared energy. This means that while they only absorb a small part of the energy that reaches us from the sun, they absorb a much larger proportion of the energy that is radiated back out again, trapping it in the atmosphere in the form of heat. This is a great question. We hear a lot about carbon dioxide when we talk about greenhouse gases and climate, so it's understandable that we think of it as the only greenhouse gas. It certainly is the most common, but other gases, such as methane, the main component of natural gas, and nitrous oxide are important greenhouse gases too, as are water vapour and CFCs, but we won't have to worry about those for our expedition calculations. No, this is another great question, and it helps us understand why we must consider the minor greenhouse gases as well as carbon dioxide. In fact, carbon dioxide is the weakest of all the greenhouse gases in terms of climate impact. Averaged over 80 years, each tonne of methane, the natural gas many of us use to heat our houses, has the same climate impact as 25 tonnes of carbon dioxide. And each tonne of nitrous oxide has the same impact as 298 tonnes of carbon dioxide. There are a few reasons why we calculate greenhouse gas emissions. Firstly, it helps us understand which processes emit most greenhouse gases and therefore where and how things need to change. Next, it allows us to apply regulatory mechanisms like carbon taxes or permits to disincentivize emissions-intensive practices. It also allows us to track our progress, both positive and negative, towards a zero-carbon future. Finally, we can use the data we collect to refine our climate models to make better predictions. There are just 4 steps to calculating greenhouse gas emissions. Firstly, we must collect measurable usage or consumption data. For example, the distance a vehicle travels or the amount of fuel burned. We then use emission factors to convert measurable quantities into greenhouse gas emissions. An emission factor tells us how much of a greenhouse gas is emitted for every unit of consumption. For example, how much carbon dioxide is produced for every kilometre driven, or how much methane is released for every cubic metre of natural gas burned. In order to take account of the different climate impacts of each gas, we apply global warming potentials to convert all gases into a carbon dioxide equivalent, a single number that expresses all emissions as if they were carbon dioxide. Following on from what we learned earlier about relative climate impacts of greenhouse gases, for methane this number is 25, and for nitrous oxide it's 298. Finally, if required, we can calculate an emission cost using an applicable dollar per tonne factor, for example, $100 per tonne. As you can see, the process of calculating greenhouse gas emissions is actually quite straightforward, but it takes a lot of hard work and experimentation to determine the emission factors and global warming potentials that we use. These values are continually being updated based on new information from work by government agencies like the US EPA and global organizations like the IPCC. Thanks for watching this little video on calculating greenhouse gas emissions. I hope you found it interesting. Given the mission of Sea Women, I think that it's really important that we account for and offset, if we can, our own expedition emissions. So I'm really grateful to Susan for suggesting it. If you haven't already, please consider supporting me as I raise money to take part in the 2022 Sea Women expedition to Norway. I look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye.